The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 41. And at the revolution of the year, the sons of Jacob journeyed from Shechem, and they came to Hebron, to their father Isaac, and they dwelt there. But their flocks and herds they fed daily in Shechem, for there was there in those days good and fat pasture, and Jacob and his sons and all their household dwelt in the valley of Hebron. And it was in those days, in that year, being the 106th year of the life of Jacob, in the 10th year of Jacob's coming from Padan Aram, that Leah, the wife of Jacob, died. She was 51 years old when she died in Hebron. And Jacob and his sons buried her in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which is in Hebron, which Abraham had bought from the children of Heth for the possession of a burial place. And the sons of Jacob dwelt with their father in the valley of Hebron, and all the inhabitants of the land knew their strength, and their fame went throughout the land. And Joseph, the son of Jacob, and his brother Benjamin, the sons of Rachel, the wife of Jacob, were yet young in those days, and did not go out with their brethren during their battles in all the cities of the Amorites. And when Joseph saw the strength of his brethren and their greatness, he praised them and extolled them. But he ranked himself greater than them, and extolled himself above them. And Jacob, his father, also loved him more than any of his sons, for he was a son of his old age. And through his love toward him, he made him a coat of many colors. And when Joseph saw that his father loved him more than his brethren, he continued to exalt himself above his brethren, and he brought unto his father evil reports concerning them. And the sons of Jacob, seeing the whole of Joseph's conduct toward them, and that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably to him all the days. And Joseph was 17 years old, and he was still magnifying himself above his brethren, and thought of raising himself above them. At that time he dreamed a dream, and he came unto his brothers, and told them his dream. And he said unto them, I dreamed a dream, and behold, we were all binding sheaves in the field. And my sheaf rose and placed itself upon the ground, and your sheaf surrounded it and bowed down to it. And his brethren answered him and said unto him, What meaneth this dream that thou didst dream? Dost thou imagine in thy heart to reign or rule over us? And he still came and told the thing to his father Jacob. And Jacob kissed Joseph when he heard these words from his mouth, and Jacob blessed Joseph. And when the sons of Jacob saw that their father had blessed Joseph, and had kissed him, and that he loved him exceedingly, they became jealous of him, and hated him the more. And after this Joseph dreamed another dream, and related the dream to his father in the presence of his brethren. And Joseph said unto his father and brethren, Behold, I have again dreamed a dream, and behold, the sun and moon and the 11 stars bowed down to me. And his father heard the words of Joseph and his dream. And seeing that his brethren hated Joseph on account of this matter, Jacob therefore rebuked Joseph before his brethren on account of this thing, saying, What meaneth this dream which thou hast dreamed, and this magnifying thyself before thy brethren who are older than thou art? Dost thou imagine in thy heart that I and thy mother and thy 11 brethren will come and bow down to thee, that thou speakest these things? And his brethren were jealous of him on account of his words and dreams, and they continued to hate him, and Jacob reserved the dreams in his heart. And the sons of Jacob went one day to feed their father's flock in Shechem, for they were still herdsmen in those days. And whilst the sons of Jacob were that day feeding in Shechem, they delayed, and the time of gathering in the cattle was past, and they had not arrived. And Jacob saw that his sons were delayed in Shechem. And Jacob said within himself, Peradventure the people of Shechem have risen up to fight against them, therefore they have delayed coming this day. And Jacob called Joseph his son, and commanded him, saying, Behold, thy brethren are feeding in Shechem this day, and behold, they have not yet come back. Go now, therefore, and see where they are, and bring me word back concerning the welfare of thy brethren, and the welfare of the flock. And Jacob sent his son Joseph to the valley of Hebron, and Joseph came for his brothers to Shechem, and could not find them. And Joseph went about the field which was near Shechem, to see where his brothers had turned. And he missed his road in the wilderness, and knew not which way he should go. And an angel of the Lord found him wandering in the road toward the field. And Joseph said unto the angel of the Lord, I seek my brethren. Hast thou not heard where they are feeding? And the angel of the Lord said unto Joseph, I saw thy brethren feeding here, and I heard them say they would go to feed in Dothan. And Joseph hearkened to the voice of the angel of the Lord, and he went to his brethren in Dothan, and he found them in Dothan feeding the flock. And Joseph advanced to his brethren, and before he had come nigh unto them, they had resolved to slay him. And Simeon said to his brethren, Behold, the man of dreams is coming unto us this day. And now therefore come, and let us kill him, and cast him in one of the pits that are in the wilderness. And when his father shall seek him from us, we will say an evil beast has devoured him. And Reuben heard the words of his brethren concerning Joseph, and he said unto them, You should not do this thing, for how can we look up to our father Jacob? Cast him into this pit to die there, but stretch not forth a hand upon him to spill his blood. And Reuben said this in order to deliver him from their hand, to bring him back to his father. And when Joseph came to his brethren, he sat before them. And they rose upon him, and seized him, and smote him to the earth, and stripped the coat of many colors which he had on. And they took him, and cast him into a pit. And in the pit there was no water, but serpents and scorpions. And Joseph was afraid of the serpents and scorpions that were in the pit. And Joseph cried out with a loud voice, and the Lord hid the serpents and scorpions in the sides of the pit, and they did no harm unto Joseph. And Joseph called out from the pit to his brethren, and said unto them, What have I done unto you? And in what have I sinned? Why do you not fear the Lord concerning me? Am I not of your bones and flesh? And is not Jacob your father, my father? Why do you do this thing unto me this day? And how will you be able to look up to our father Jacob?" And he continued to cry out and call unto his brethren from the pit. And he said, "O Judah, Simeon, and Levi, my brethren, lift me up from the place of darkness in which you have placed me, and come this day to have compassion on me, ye children of the Lord, and sons of Jacob my father. And if I have sinned unto you, are you not the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? If they saw an orphan, they had compassion over him, or one that was hungry, they gave him bread to eat, or one that was thirsty, they gave him water to drink, or one that was naked, they covered him with garments. And how then will you withhold your pity from your brother? For I am of your flesh and bones. And if I have sinned unto you, surely you will do this on account of my father." And Joseph spoke these words from the pit, and his brethren could not listen to him, nor incline their ears to the words of Joseph. And Joseph was crying and weeping in the pit. And Joseph said, "Oh, that my father knew this day the act which my brothers have done unto me, and the words which they have this day spoken unto me." And all his brethren heard his cries and weeping in the pit, and his brethren went and removed themselves from the pit, so that they might not hear the cries of Joseph and his weeping in the pit. The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 42. And they went and sat on the opposite side, about a distance of a bow shot, and they sat there to eat bread. And whilst they were eating, they held counsel together what was to be done with him, whether to slay him, or to bring him back to his father. They were holding the counsel when they lifted up their eyes, and saw, and behold, there was a company of Ishmaelites coming at a distance by the road of Gilead, going down to Egypt. And Judah said unto them, "What gain will it be to us if we slay our brother? Peradventure God will require him from us. This then is the counsel proposed concerning him, which you shall do unto him. Behold, this company of Ishmaelites going down to Egypt. Now, therefore, come, let us dispose of him to them, and let not our hand be upon him. And they will lead him along with them, and he will be lost amongst the people of the land, and we will not put him to death with our own hands." And the proposal pleased his brethren, and they did according to the word of Judah. And whilst they were discoursing about this matter, and before the company of Ishmaelites had come up to them, 7 trading men of Midian passed by them. And as they passed, they were thirsty. And they lifted up their eyes, and saw the pit in which Joseph was immured. And they looked, and behold, every species of bird was upon him. And these Midianites ran to the pit to drink water, for they thought that it contained water. And on coming before the pit, they heard the voice of Joseph crying and weeping in the pit. And they looked down into the pit, and they saw, and behold, there was a youth of comely appearance, and well favored. And they called unto him, and said, "Who art thou, and who brought thee hither? And who placed thee in this pit, in the wilderness? And they all assisted to raise up Joseph, and they drew him out, and brought him up from the pit, and took him, and went away on their journey, and passed by his brethren. And these said unto them, Why do you do this, to take our servant from us, and to go away? Surely we placed this youth in the pit because he rebelled against us, and you come and bring him up and lead him away? Now then, give us back our servant. And the Midianites answered and said unto the sons of Jacob, Is this your servant? Or does this man attend you? Peradventure you are all his servants, for he is more comely and well favored than any of you. And why do you all speak falsely unto us? Now therefore we will not listen to your words, nor attend to you. For we found the youth in the pit in the wilderness, and we took him. We will therefore go on. And all the sons of Jacob approached them, and rose up to them, and said unto them, Give us back our servant, and why will you die by the edge of the sword? And the Midianites cried out against them, and they drew their swords, and approached to fight with the sons of Jacob. And behold, Simeon rose up from his seat against them, and sprang upon the ground, and drew his sword, and approached the Midianites, and he gave a terrible shout before them, so that his shouting was heard at a distance, and the earth shook at Simeon's shouting. And the Midianites were terrified on account of Simeon and the noise of his shouting, and they fell upon their faces, and were excessively alarmed. And Simeon said unto them, Verily I am Simeon, the son of Jacob the Hebrew, who have, only with my brother, destroyed the city of Shechem and the cities of the Amorites. So shall God moreover do unto me, that if all your brethren the people of Midian, and also the kings of Canaan, were to come with you, they could not fight against me. Now, therefore, give us back the youth whom you have taken, lest I give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. And the Midianites were more afraid of Simeon, and they approached the sons of Jacob with terror and fright, and with pathetic words, saying, Surely you have said that the young man is your servant, and that he rebelled against you, and therefore you placed him in the pit. What then will you do with a servant who rebels against his master? Now therefore sell him unto us, and we will give you all that you require for him. And the Lord was pleased to do this in order that the sons of Jacob should not slay their brother. And the Midianites saw that Joseph was of a comely appearance and well favored, and they desired him in their hearts, and were urgent to purchase him from his brethren. And the sons of Jacob hearkened to the Midianites, and they sold their brother Joseph to them for 20 pieces of silver. And Reuben their brother was not with them. And the Midianites took Joseph, and continued their journey to Gilead. They were going along the road, and the Midianites repented of what they had done in having purchased the young man. And one said to the other, What is this thing that we have done in taking this youth from the Hebrews, who is of comely appearance and well favored? Perhaps this youth is stolen from the land of the Hebrews. And why then have we done this thing? And if he should be sought for and found in our hands, we shall die through him. Now surely hardy and powerful men have sold him to us, the strength of one whom you saw this day. Perhaps they stole him from his land with their might and with their powerful arm, and have therefore sold him to us for the small value which we gave unto them. And whilst they were thus discoursing together, they looked, and behold, the company of Ishmaelites, which was coming at first, and which the sons of Jacob saw, was advancing toward the Midianites. And the Midianites said to each other, Come, let us sell this youth to the company of Ishmaelites who are coming toward us, and we will take for him the little that we gave for him, and we will be delivered from this evil. And they did so, and they reached the Ishmaelites, and the Midianites sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, which they had given for him to his brethren. And the Midianites went on their road to Gilead, and the Ishmaelites took Joseph, and they let him ride upon one of the camels, and they were leading him to Egypt. And Joseph heard that the Ishmaelites were proceeding to Egypt, and Joseph lamented and wept at this thing, that he was to be so far removed from the land of Canaan, from his father, and he wept bitterly whilst he was riding upon the camel. And one of their men observed him, and made him go down from the camel and walk on foot. And notwithstanding this, Joseph continued to cry and weep, and he said, Oh, my father, my father! And one of the Ishmaelites rose up and smote Joseph upon the cheek, and he still continued to weep. And Joseph was fatigued in the road, and was unable to proceed on account of the bitterness of his soul. And they all smote him, and afflicted him in the road, and they terrified him in order that he might cease from weeping. And the Lord saw the ambition of Joseph and his trouble, and the Lord brought down upon those men darkness and confusion, and the hand of every one that smote him became withered. And they said to each other, What is this thing that God has done to us in the road? And they knew not that this befell them on account of Joseph. And the men proceeded on the road, and they passed along the road of Ephrath, where Rachel was buried. And Joseph reached his mother's grave, and Joseph hastened and ran to his mother's grave, and fell upon the grave and wept. And Joseph cried aloud upon his mother's grave, and he said, O my mother, my mother! O thou who didst give me birth, awake now, and rise and see thy son, how he has been sold for a slave, and no one to pity him. O rise and see thy son, weep with me on account of my troubles, and see the heart of my brethren. Arouse, my mother, arouse, awake from thy sleep for me, and direct thy battles against my brethren. Oh, how have they stripped me of my coat, and sold me already twice for a slave, and separated me from my father, and there is no one to pity me. Arouse, and lay thy cause against them before God, and see whom God will justify in the judgment, and whom he will condemn. Rise, O my mother, rise, awake from thy sleep, and see my father, how his soul is with me this day, and comfort him, and ease his heart. And Joseph continued to speak these words, and Joseph cried aloud, and wept bitterly upon his mother's grave. And he ceased speaking, and from the bitterness of heart he became still as a stone upon the grave. And Joseph heard a voice speaking to him from beneath the ground, which answered him with bitterness of heart, and with a voice of weeping and praying in these words, my son Joseph, I have heard the voice of thy weeping, and the voice of thy lamentation. I have seen thy tears. I know thy troubles, my son, and it grieves me for thy sake, and abundant grief is added to my grief. Now therefore, my son Joseph, my son, hope to the Lord, and wait for him, and do not fear, for the Lord is with thee. He will deliver thee from all trouble. Rise, my son, go down unto Egypt with thy masters, and do not fear, for the Lord is with thee, my son. And she continued to speak like unto these words unto Joseph, and she was still. And Joseph heard this, and he wondered greatly at this, and he continued to weep. And after this one of the Ishmaelites observed him crying and weeping upon the grave, and his anger was kindled against him, and he drove him from there, and he smote him and cursed him. And Joseph said unto the men, May I find grace in your sight to take me back to my father's house? And he will give you abundance of riches. And they answered him, saying, Art thou not a slave? And where is thy father? And if thou hadst a father, thou wouldest not already twice have been sold for a slave for so little value. And their anger was still roused against him, and they continued to smite him and to chastise him. And Joseph wept bitterly. And the Lord saw Joseph's affliction, and the Lord again smote these men, and chastised them. And the Lord caused darkness to envelop them upon the earth. And the lightning flashed, and the thunder roared, and the earth shook at the voice of the thunder, and of the mighty wind. And the men were terrified, and knew not where they should go. And the beasts and camels stood still, and they led them, but they would not go. They smote them, and they crouched upon the ground. And the men said to each other, What is this that our God has done to us? What are our transgressions? And what are our sins that this thing has thus befallen us? And one of them answered and said unto them, Perhaps on account of the sin of afflicting this slave has this thing happened this day to us. Now therefore implore him strongly to forgive us, and then we shall know on whose account this evil befalleth us. And if God shall have compassion over us, then we shall know that all this cometh to us on account of the sin of afflicting this slave. And the men did so. And they supplicated Joseph, and pressed him to forgive them. And they said, We have sinned to the Lord and to thee. Now therefore vouchsafe to request of thy God, that he shall put away this death from amongst us, for we have sinned to him. And Joseph did according to their words, and the Lord hearkened to Joseph. And the Lord put away the plague which he had afflicted upon those men on account of Joseph. And the beast rose up from the ground, and they conducted them, and they went on. And the raging storm abated, and the earth became tranquilized. And the men proceeded on their journey to go down to Egypt. And the men knew that this evil had befallen them on account of Joseph. And they said to each other, Behold, we know that it was on account of his affliction that this evil befell us. Now therefore, why shall we bring this death upon our souls? Let us hold counsel what to do to this slave. And one answered and said, Surely he told us to bring him back to his father. Now therefore come, let us take him back, and we will go to the place that he will tell us, and take from his family the price that we gave for him, and we will then go away. And one answered again and said, Behold, this counsel is very good, but we cannot do so, for the way is very far from us, and we cannot go out of our road. And one more answered and said unto them, This is the counsel to be adopted. We will not swerve from it. Behold, we are this day going to Egypt, and when we shall have come to Egypt, we will sell him there at a high price, and we will be delivered from his evil. And this thing pleased the men, and they did so, and they continued their journey to Egypt with Joseph. The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 43. And when the sons of Jacob had sold their brother Joseph to the Midianites, their hearts were smitten on account of him, and they repented of their acts. And they sought for him to bring him back, but could not find him. And Reuben returned to the pit in which Joseph had been put, in order to lift him out, and restore him to his father. And Reuben stood by the pit, and he heard not a word. And he called out, Joseph, Joseph! And no one answered or uttered a word. And Reuben said, Joseph has died through fright, or some serpent has caused his death. And Reuben descended into the pit, and he searched for Joseph, and could not find him in the pit. And he came out again. And Reuben tore his garments, and he said, The child is not there. And how shall I reconcile my father about him, if he be dead? And he went to his brethren, and found them grieving on account of Joseph, and counseling together how to reconcile their father about him. And Reuben said unto his brethren, I came to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not there. What then shall we say unto our father? For my father will only seek the lad from me. And his brethren answered him, saying, Thus and thus we did, and our hearts afterwards smote us on account of this act. And we now sit to seek a pretext, how we shall reconcile our father to it. And Reuben said unto them, What is this you have done to bring down the gray hairs of our father in sorrow to the grave? The thing is not good that you have done. And Reuben sat with them, and they all rose up and swore to each other not to tell this thing unto Jacob. And they all said, The man who will tell this to our father or his household, or who will report this to any of the children of the land, we will all rise up against him and slay him with the sword. And the sons of Jacob feared each other in this matter, from the youngest to the oldest, and no one spoke a word, and they concealed the thing in their hearts. And they afterwards sat down to determine and invent something to say unto their father Jacob concerning all these things. And Issachar said unto them, Here is an advice for you, if it seem good in your eyes to do this thing. Take the coat which belongeth to Joseph, and tear it, and kill a kid of the goats, and dip it in its blood, and send it to our father. And when he seeth it, he will say, An evil beast has devoured him. Therefore tear ye his coat, and behold, his blood will be upon his coat. And by your doing this, we shall be free of our father's murmurings. And Issachar's advice pleased them, and they hearkened unto him, and they did according to the word of Issachar, which he had counseled them. They hastened, and took Joseph's coat, and tore it. And they killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood of the kid, and then trampled it in the dust. And they sent the coat to their father Jacob by the hand of Naphtali, and they commanded him to say these words, We had gathered in the cattle, and had come as far as the road to Shechem, and farther, when we found this coat upon the road in the wilderness, dipped in blood and in dust. Now therefore know whether it be thy son's coat or not. And Naphtali went, and he came unto his father, and he gave him the coat. And he spoke unto him all the words which his brethren had commanded him. And Jacob saw Joseph's coat, and he knew it, and he fell upon his face to the ground, and became as still as a stone. And he afterwards rose up and cried out with a loud and weeping voice. And he said, It is the coat of my son Joseph. And Jacob hastened and sent one of his servants to his sons, who went to them and found them coming along the road with the flock. And the sons of Jacob came to their father about evening, and behold, their garments were torn, and dust was upon their heads. And they found their father crying out and weeping with a loud voice. And Jacob said unto his sons, Tell me truly, what evil have you this day suddenly brought upon me? And they answered their father Jacob, saying, We were coming along this day after the flock had been gathered in, and we came as far as the city of Shechem, by the road in the wilderness. And we found this coat filled with blood upon the ground. And we knew it, and we sent it unto thee, if thou couldest know it. And Jacob heard the words of his sons, and he cried out with a loud voice, and he said, It is the coat of my son. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is rent in pieces. For I sent him this day to see whether it was well with you, and well with the flocks, and to bring me word again from you. And he went as I commanded him, and this has happened to him this day, whilst I thought my son was with you. And the sons of Jacob answered and said, He did not come to us, neither have we seen him from the time of our going out from thee until now. And when Jacob heard their words, he again cried out loud. And he rose up and tore his garments, and he put sackcloth upon his loins, and he wept bitterly. And he moaned and lifted up his voice in weeping, and exclaimed, and said these words, Joseph, my son, O my son Joseph, I sent thee this day after the welfare of thy brethren, and behold, thou hast been torn in pieces. Through my hand has this happened to my son. It grieves me for thee, Joseph, my son. It grieves me for thee. How sweet wast thou to me during life, and now how exceedingly bitter is thy death to me. Oh, that I had died in thy stead, Joseph, my son, for it grieves me sadly for thee, my son. Oh, my son, Joseph, my son, where art thou, and where hast thou been drawn? Arouse, arouse from thy place, and come and see my grief for thee, O my son Joseph. Come now and number the tears gushing from my eyes down my cheeks, and bring them up before the Lord, that his anger may turn from me. O Joseph, my son, how didst thou fall by the hand of one by whom no one had fallen from the beginning of the world unto this day? For thou hast been put to death by the smiting of an enemy, inflicted with cruelty. But surely I know that this has happened to thee on account of the multitude of my sins. Arouse now, and see how bitter is my trouble for thee, my son, although I did not rear thee, nor fashion thee, nor give thee breath and soul. But it was God who formed thee, and built thy bones, and covered them with flesh, and breathed into thy nostrils the breath of life. And then he gave thee unto me. Now truly God, who gave thee unto me, He has taken thee from me, and such then has befallen thee. And Jacob continued to speak like unto these words concerning Joseph, and he wept bitterly. He fell to the ground and became still. And all the sons of Jacob, seeing their father's trouble, they repented of what they had done, and they also wept bitterly. And Judah rose up and lifted his father's head from the ground, and placed it upon his lap, and he wiped his father's tears from his cheeks. And Judah wept an exceedingly great weeping, whilst his father's head was reclining upon his lap, still as a stone. And the sons of Jacob saw their father's trouble, and they lifted up their voices and continued to weep. And Jacob was yet lying upon the ground, still as a stone. And all his sons and his servants' children rose up and stood round him to comfort him, and he refused to be comforted. And the whole household of Jacob rose up and mourned a great mourning on account of Joseph and their father's trouble. And the intelligence reached Isaac, the son of Abraham, the father of Jacob, and he wept bitterly on account of Joseph, he and all his household. And he went from the place where he dwelt in Hebron, and his men with him, and he comforted Jacob his son, and he refused to be comforted. And after this Jacob rose up from the ground, and his tears were running down his cheeks, and he said unto his sons, Rise up, and take your swords and your bows, and go forth into the field, and seek whether you can find my son's body, and bring it unto me, that I may bury it. Seek also, I pray you, among the beasts, and hunt them, and that which shall come the first before you, seize and bring it unto me. Perhaps the Lord will this day pity my affliction, and prepare before you that which did tear my son in pieces, and bring it unto me, and I will avenge the cause of my son. And his sons did as their father had commanded them, and they rose up early in the morning, and each took his sword and his bow in hand, and they went forth into the field to hunt the beasts. And Jacob was still crying aloud, and weeping, and walking to and fro in the house, and smiting his hands together, saying, Joseph, my son, Joseph, my son. And the sons of Jacob went into the wilderness to seize the beasts. And behold, a wolf came toward them, and they seized him, and brought him unto their father. And they said unto him, This is the first we have found, and we have brought him unto thee as thou didst command us, and thy son's body we could not find. And Jacob took the beast from the hands of his sons, and he cried out with a loud and weeping voice, holding the beast in his hand, and he spoke with a bitter heart unto the beast, Why didst thou devour my son Joseph? And how didst thou have no fear of the God of the earth, or of my trouble for my son Joseph? And thou didst devour my son for naught, because he committed no violence, and didst thereby render me culpable on his account. Therefore God will require him that is persecuted. And the Lord opened the mouth of the beast in order to comfort Jacob with its words. And it answered Jacob, and spoke these words unto him, As God liveth, who created us in the earth, and as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I did not see thy son, neither did I tear him to pieces. But from a distant land I also came to seek my son, who went from me this day, and I know not whether he be living or dead. And I came this day into the field to seek my son, and your sons found me, and seized me, and increased my grief, and have this day brought me before thee, and I have now spoken all my words to thee. And now therefore, O Son of man, I am in thy hands, and do unto me this day as it may seem good in thy sight. But by the life of God who created me, I did not see thy Son, nor did I tear him to pieces. Neither has the flesh of man entered my mouth all the days of my life. And when Jacob heard the words of the beast, he was greatly astonished, and sent forth the beast from his hand, and she went her way. And Jacob was still crying aloud and weeping for Joseph day after day, and he mourned for his son many days. The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 44. And the sons of Ishmael, who had bought Joseph from the Midianites, who had bought him from his brethren, went to Egypt with Joseph. And they came upon the borders of Egypt. And when they came near unto Egypt, they met 4 men of the sons of Medan, the son of Abraham, who had gone forth from the land of Egypt on their journey. And the Ishmaelites said unto them, Do you desire to purchase this slave from us? And they said, Deliver him over to us. And they delivered Joseph over to them. And they beheld him, that he was a very comely youth, and they purchased him for 20 shekels. And the Ishmaelites continued their journey to Egypt. And the Midianim also returned that day to Egypt. And the Midianim said to each other, Behold, we have heard that Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, seeketh a good servant, who shall stand before him to attend him, and to make him overseer over his house and all belonging to him. Now therefore come, let us sell him to him for what we may desire, if he be able to give unto us that which we shall require for him. And these Midianites went and came to the house of Potiphar, and said unto him, We have heard that thou seekest a good servant to attend thee. Behold, we have a servant that will please thee, if thou canst give unto us that which we may desire, and we will sell him unto thee. And Potiphar said, Bring him before me, and I will see him, and if he pleases me, I will give unto you that which you may require for him. And the Midianim went and brought Joseph, and placed him before Potiphar. And he saw him, and he pleased him exceedingly. And Potiphar said unto them, Tell me what you require for this youth. And they said, 400 pieces of silver we desire for him. And Potiphar said, I will give it to you if you bring me the record of his sale to you, and will tell me his history, for perhaps he may be stolen, for this youth is neither a slave nor the son of a slave, but I observe him in the appearance of a goodly and handsome person. And the Midianim went and brought unto him the Ishmaelites who had sold him to them. And they told him, saying, He is a slave, and we sold him to them. And Potiphar heard the words of the Ishmaelites in his giving the silver unto the Midianim. And the Midianim took the silver and went on their journey, and the Ishmaelites also returned home. And Potiphar took Joseph and brought him to his house, that he might serve him. And Joseph found favor in the sight of Potiphar, and he placed confidence in him, and made him overseer over his house, and all that belonged to him he delivered over into his hand. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a prosperous man. And the Lord blessed the house of Potiphar for the sake of Joseph. And Potiphar left all that he had in the hands of Joseph. And Joseph was the one that caused things to come in and go out, and everything was regulated by his wish in the house of Potiphar. And Joseph was 18 years old, a youth with beautiful eyes and of comely appearance, and like unto him was not in the whole land of Egypt. At that time, whilst he was in his master's house, going in and out of the house and attending his master, Zelicah, his master's wife, lifted up her eyes toward Joseph, and she looked at him, and behold, he was a youth comely and well favored. And she coveted his beauty in her heart, and her soul was fixed upon Joseph, and she enticed him day after day. And Zelicah persuaded Joseph daily, but Joseph did not lift up his eyes to behold his master's wife. And Zelicah said unto him, How goodly are thy appearance and form! Truly, I have looked at all the slaves, and have not seen so beautiful a slave as thou art. And Joseph said unto her, Surely he who created me in my mother's womb created all mankind. And she said unto him, How beautiful are thine eyes, which with thou hast dazzled all the inhabitants of Egypt, men and women. And he said unto her, How beautiful they are whilst we are alive! But shouldest thou behold them in the grave, surely thou wouldest move away from them. And she said unto him, How beautiful and pleasing are all thy words! Take now, I pray thee, a house, and play with thy hands, and let us hear thy words. And he said unto her, How beautiful and pleasing are my words, when I speak the praise of my God and his glory. And she said unto him, How very beautiful is the hair of thy head! Behold the golden comb which is in the house. Take it, I pray thee, and curl the hair of thy head. And he said unto her, How long wilt thou speak these words? Cease to utter these words to me, and rise and attend to thy domestic affairs. And she said unto him, There is no one in my house, and there is nothing to attend to but to thy words and to thy wish. Yet notwithstanding all this, she could not bring Joseph unto her, neither did he place his eye upon her, but directed his eyes below to the ground. And Zelicah desired Joseph in her heart, that he should lie with her. And at the time that Joseph was sitting in the house doing his work, Zelicah came and sat before him, and she enticed him daily with her discourse to lie with her, or ever to look at her, but Joseph would not hearken to her. And she said unto him, If thou wilt not do according to my words, I will chastise thee with the punishment of death, and put an iron yoke upon thee. And Joseph said unto her, Surely God, who created man, looseth the fetters of prisoners, and it is he who will deliver me from thy prison and from thy judgment. And when she could not prevail over him to persuade him, and her soul being still fixed upon him, her desire threw her into a grievous sickness. And all the women of Egypt came to visit her, and they said unto her, Why art thou in this declining state, thou that lackest nothing? Surely thy husband is great and esteemed prince in the sight of the king. Shouldest thou lack anything of what thy heart desireth? And Zelicah answered them, saying, This day it shall be made known to you, whence this disorder springs in which you see me. And she commanded her maidservants to prepare food for all the women, and she made a banquet for them, and all the women ate in the house of Zelicah. And she gave them knives to peel the citrons to eat them, and she commanded that they should dress Joseph in costly garments, and that he should appear before them. And Joseph came before their eyes, and all the women looked on Joseph, and could not take their eyes from off him. And they all cut their hands with the knives that they had in their hands, and all the citrons that were in their hands were filled with blood. And they knew not what they had done, but they continued to look at the beauty of Joseph, and did not turn their eyelids from him. And Zelicah saw what they had done, and she said unto them, What is this work that you have done? Behold, I gave you citrons to eat, and you have all cut your hands. And the women saw their hands, and behold, they were full of blood, and the blood flowed down upon their garments. And they said unto her, This slave in your house has overcome us, and we could not turn our eyelids from him on account of his beauty. And she said unto them, Surely this happened to you in the moment that you looked at him, and you could not contain yourselves from him. How then can I refrain when he is constantly in my house, and I see him day after day going in and out of my house? How then can I keep from declining or even from perishing on account of this? And they said unto her, The words are true, for who can see this beautiful form in the house and refrain from him? And is he not thy slave and attendant in thy house? And why dost thou not tell him that which is in thy heart, and sufferest thy soul to perish through this manner? And she said unto them, I am daily endeavoring to persuade him, and he will not consent to my wishes. And I promised him everything that is good, and yet I could meet with no return from him. I am therefore in a declining state, as you see. And Zelicah became very ill on account of her desire toward Joseph, and she was desperately lovesick on account of him. And all the people of the house of Zelicah and her husband knew nothing of this matter, that Zelicah was ill on account of her love to Joseph. And all the people of her house asked her, saying, Why art thou ill and declining, and lackest nothing? And she said unto them, I know not this thing which is daily increasing upon me. And all the women and her friends came daily to see her, and they spoke with her. And she said unto them, This can only be through the love of Joseph. And they said unto her, Entice him, and seize him secretly. Perhaps he may hearken to thee, and put off this death from thee. And Zelicah became worse from her love to Joseph, and she continued to decline, till she had scarce strength to stand. And on a certain day Joseph was doing his master's work in the house. And Zelicah came secretly and fell suddenly upon him. And Joseph rose up against her, and he was more powerful than she, and he brought her down to the ground. And Zelicah wept on account of the desire of her heart toward him, and she supplicated him with weeping, and her tears flowed down her cheeks, and she spoke unto him in a voice of supplication and in bitterness of soul, saying, Hast thou ever heard, seen, or known of so beautiful a woman as I am, or better than myself, who speak daily unto thee, fall into a decline through love for thee, confer all this honor upon thee, and still thou wilt not hearken to my voice? And if it be through fear of thy master, lest he punish thee, as the king liveth, no harm shall come to thee from thy master through this thing. Now, therefore, pray, listen to me, and consent for the sake of the honor which I have conferred upon thee, and put off this death from me. And why should I die for thy sake? And she ceased to speak. And Joseph answered her, saying, Refrain from me, and leave this matter to my master. Behold, my master knoweth not what there is with me in the house, for all that belongeth to him he has delivered into my hand. And how shall I do these things in my master's house? For he hath also greatly honored me in his house, and he hath also made me overseer over his house, and he hath exalted me, and there is no one greater in this house than I am. And my master hath refrained nothing from me, excepting thee who art his wife. How then canst thou speak these words unto me? And how can I do this great evil and sin to God and to thy husband? Now therefore refrain from me, and speak no more such words as these, for I will not hearken to thy words. But Zelicah would not hearken to Joseph when he spoke these words unto her, but she daily enticed him to listen to her. And it was after this that the brook of Egypt was filled above all its sides. And all the inhabitants of Egypt went forth, and also the king and princes went forth with timbrels and dances, for it was a great rejoicing in Egypt, and a holiday at the time of the inundation of the sea Sihor, and they went there to rejoice all the day. And when the Egyptians went out to the river to rejoice, as was their custom, all the people of the house of Potiphar went with them. But Zelicah would not go with them, for she said, I am indisposed. And she remained alone in the house, and no other person was with her in the house. And she rose up, and ascended to her temple in the house, and dressed herself in princely garments. And she placed upon her head precious stones of onyx stones, inlaid with silver and gold. And she beautified her face and skin with all sorts of women's purifying liquids. And she perfumed the temple and the house with cassia and frankincense. And she spread myrrh and aloes. And she afterwards sat in the entrance of the temple, in the passage of the house, through which Joseph passed to do his work. And behold, Joseph came from the field, and entered the house to do his master's work. And he came to the place through which he had to pass, and he saw all the work of Zelicah, and he turned back. And Zelicah saw Joseph turning back from her, and she called out to him, saying, What aileth thee, Joseph? Come to thy work, and behold, I will make room for thee until thou shalt have passed to thy seat. And Joseph returned and came to the house, and passed from thence to the place of his seat. And he sat down to do his master's work as usual, and behold, Zelicah came to him, and stood before him in princely garments, and the scent from her clothes was spread to a distance. And she hastened, and caught hold of Joseph and his garments. And she said unto him, As the king liveth, if thou wilt not perform my request, thou shalt die this day. And she hastened, and stretched forth her other hand, and drew a sword from beneath her garments. And she placed it upon Joseph's neck, and she said, Rise, and perform my request, and if not, thou diest this day. And Joseph was afraid of her at her doing this thing, and he rose up to flee from her, and she seized the front of his garments. And in the terror of his flight the garment which Zelicah seized was torn, and Joseph left the garment in the hand of Zelicah. And he fled and got out, for he was in fear. And when Zelicah saw that Joseph's garment was torn, and that he had left it in her hand, and had fled, she was afraid of her life, lest the report should spread concerning her, and she rose up and acted with cunning, and put off the garments in which she was dressed, and she put on other garments. And she took Joseph's garment, and she laid it beside her, and she went and seated herself in the place where she had sat in her illness, before the people of her house had gone out to the river. And she called a young lad who was then in the house, and she ordered him to call the people of the house to her. And when she saw them, she said unto them with a loud voice and lamentation, See what a Hebrew your master has brought to me in the house, for he came this day to lie with me. For when you had gone out, he came to the house, and seeing that there was no person in the house, he came unto me, and caught hold of me, with intent to lie with me. And I seized his garments, and tore them, and called out against him with a loud voice. And when I had lifted up my voice, he was afraid of his life, and left his garment before me, and fled. And the people of her house spoke nothing, but their wrath was very much kindled against Joseph. And they went to his master, and told him the words of his wife. And Potiphar came home enraged, and his wife cried out to him, saying, What is this thing that thou hast done unto me, in bringing a Hebrew servant into my house? For he came unto me this day to sport with me. Thus did he do unto me this day. And Potiphar heard the words of his wife, and he ordered Joseph to be punished with severe stripes. And they did so to him. And whilst they were smiting him, Joseph called out with a loud voice, and he lifted up his eyes to heaven, and he said, O Lord God, thou knowest that I am innocent of all these things, and why shall I die this day through falsehood, by the hand of these uncircumcised wicked men, whom thou knowest? And whilst Potiphar's men were beating Joseph, he continued to cry out and weep. And there was a child there 11 months old, and the Lord opened the mouth of the child, and he spake these words before Potiphar's men, who were smiting Joseph, saying, What do you want of this man, and why do you do this evil unto him? My mother speaketh falsely, and uttereth lies. Thus was the transaction. And the child told them accurately all that happened, and all the words of Zelicah to Joseph day after day did he declare unto them. And all the men heard the words of the child, and they wondered greatly at the child's words. And the child ceased to speak, and became still. And Potiphar was very much ashamed at the words of his son, and he commanded his men not to beat Joseph any more, and the men ceased beating Joseph. And Potiphar took Joseph and ordered him to be brought to justice before the priests, who were judges belonging to the king. in order to judge him concerning this affair. And Potiphar and Joseph came before the priests, who were the king's judges. And he said unto them, Decide, I pray you, what judgment is due a servant, for thus has he done. And the priest said unto Joseph, Why didst thou do this thing to thy master? And Joseph answered them, saying, Not so, my lords. Thus was the matter. And Potiphar said unto Joseph, Surely I entrusted in thy hands all that belonged to me, and I withheld nothing from thee but my wife. And how couldst thou do this evil? And Joseph answered, saying, Not so, my lord. As the Lord liveth, and as my soul liveth, my lord, the word which thou didst hear from thy wife is untrue. For thus was the affair this day. A year has elapsed to me since I have been in thy house. Hast thou seen any iniquity in me, or anything which might cause thee to demand my life? And the priest said unto Potiphar, Send, we pray thee, and let them bring before us Joseph's torn garment, and let us see the tear in it. And if it shall be that the tear is in the front of the garment, then his face must have been opposite to her, and she must have caught hold of him to come to her. And with deceit did thy wife do all that she has spoken. And they brought Joseph's garment before the priests who were judges. And they saw, and behold, the tear was in the front of Joseph. And all the judging priests knew that she had pressed him, and they said, The judgment of death is not due this slave, for he has done nothing. But his judgment is that he be placed in the prison house on account of the report, which through him has gone forth against thy wife. And Potiphar heard their words, and he placed him in the prison house, the place where the king's prisoners are confined. And Joseph was in the house of confinement 12 years. Notwithstanding this, his master's wife did not turn from him, and she did not cease from speaking to him day after day to hearken to her. And at the end of 3 months Zelicah continued going to Joseph to the house of confinement day by day, and she enticed him to hearken to her. And Zelicah said unto Joseph, How long wilt thou remain in this house? But hearken now to my voice, and I will bring thee out of this house. And Joseph answered her, saying, It is better for me to remain in this house than to hearken to thy words, to sin against God. And she said unto him, If thou wilt not perform my wish, I will pluck out thine eyes, add fetters to thy feet, and will deliver thee into the hands of them whom thou didst not know before. And Joseph answered her and said, Behold, the God of the whole earth is able to deliver me from all that thou canst do unto me. For he openeth the eyes of the blind, and looseth those that are bound, and preserveth all strangers who are unacquainted with the land. And when Zelicah was unable to persuade Joseph to hearken to her, she left off going to entice him. And Joseph was still confined in the house of confinement. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, and all his brethren who were in the land of Canaan, still mourned and wept in those days on account of Joseph. For Jacob refused to be comforted for his son Joseph. And Jacob cried aloud, and wept and mourned all those days. The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 45 and Chapter 46 and Chapter 47. And it was at that time, in that year, which was the year of Joseph's going down to Egypt, after his brothers had sold him, that Reuben, the son of Jacob, went to Timnah, and took unto him for a wife Eliaram, the daughter of Avi the Canaanite, and he came to her. And Eliaram, the wife of Reuben, conceived and bare him Hanok, Pelu, Chetzron, and Carmi, 4 sons. And Simeon his brother took his sister Dinah for a wife, and she bare unto him Memuel, Yamin, Ohad, Jachin, and Zochar, 5 sons. And he afterward came to Bunah, the Canaanish woman. The same is the Bunah whom Simeon took captive from the city of Shechem. And Bunah was before Dinah, and attended upon her, and Simeon came to her, and she bare unto him Saul. And Judah went at that time to Adullam, and he came to a man of Adullam, and his name was Hira. And Judah saw there the daughter of a man from Canaan, and her name was Eliah, the daughter of Shua. And he took her and came to her. And Eliah bare unto Judah Onan, and Shiloh, 3 sons. And Levi and Issachar went to the land of the east. And they took unto themselves for wives the daughters of Jobab, the son of Joktan, the son of Eber. And Jobab, the son of Joktan, had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Adinah, and the name of the younger was Arida. And Levi took Adinah, and Issachar took Arida. And they came to the land of Canaan, to their father's house. And Adinah bare unto Levi Gershon, Kehath, and Merari, 3 sons. And Arida bare unto Issachar Tola, Puvah, Job, and Shamron, 4 sons. And Dan went to the land of Moab, and took for a wife Aphleleth, the daughter of Shamudon, the Moabite, and he brought her to the land of Canaan. And Aphleleth was barren, she had no offspring. And God afterward remembered Aphleleth, the wife of Dan, and she conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Cushim. And Gad and Naphtali went to Haran, and took from thence the daughters of Amuran, the son of Uz, the son of Nahor, for wives. And these are the names of the daughters of Amuran. The name of the elder was Miramah, and the name of the younger was Uzith. And Naphtali took Miramah, and Gad took Uzith, and brought them to the land of Canaan, to their father's house. And Miramah bare unto Naphtali Yachzeel, Guni, Yazer, and Shalem, 4 sons. And Uzith bare unto Gad Zephion, Kagi, Shunai, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, and Arali, 7 sons. And Asher went forth and took Adon, the daughter of Aphlal, the son of Hadad, the son of Ishmael, for a wife, and he brought her to the land of Canaan. And Adon, the wife of Asher, died in those days. She had no offspring. And it was after the death of Adon that Asher went to the other side of the river, and took for a wife Hadurah, the daughter of Abimel, son of Eber, the son of Shem. And the young woman was of a comely appearance, and a woman of sense. And she had been the wife of Malchiel, the son of Elam, the son of Shem. And Hadurah bare a daughter unto Malchiel, and he called her name Sirach. And Malchiel died after this. And Hadurah went and remained in her father's house. And after the death of the wife of Asher, he went and took Hadurah for a wife, and brought her to the land of Canaan. And Sirach, her daughter, he also brought with him. And she was 3 years old. And the damsel was brought up in Jacob's house. And the damsel was of a comely appearance, and she went in the sanctified ways of the children of Jacob. She lacked nothing, and the Lord gave her wisdom and understanding. And Hadurah, the wife of Asher, conceived and bare unto him Yimnah, Yishvah, Yishvi, and Beriah, 4 sons. And Zebulun went to Midian, and took for a wife Marisha, the daughter of Molad, the son of Abidiah, the son of Midian, and brought her to the land of Canaan. And Marusha bare unto Zebulun Sered, Elon, and Jachleel, 3 sons. And Jacob sent to Aram, the son of Zobah, the son of Terah, and he took for his son Benjamin Mechaliah, the daughter of Aram. And she came to the land of Canaan, to the house of Jacob. And Benjamin was 10 years old when he took Mechaliah, the daughter of Aram, for a wife. And Mechaliah conceived and bare unto Benjamin Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, and Naaman, 5 sons. And Benjamin went afterward and took for a wife Arabah, the daughter of Shamron, the son of Abraham, in addition to his first wife, and he was 18 years old. And Arabah bare unto Benjamin Ashi, Vosh, Mupim, Chupim, and Ord, 5 sons. And in those days Judah went to the house of Shem, and took Tamar, the daughter of Elam, the son of Shem, for a wife for his firstborn And came to his wife Tamar, and she became his wife. And when he came to her, he outwardly destroyed his seed, and his work was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And it was after the death of Judah's firstborn, that Judah said to Onan, Go to thy brother's wife, and marry her as the next of kin, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan took Tamar for a wife, and he came to her. And Onan also did like unto the work of his brother, and his work was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he slew him also. And when Onan died, Judah said unto Tamar, Remain in thy father's house until my son Shiloh shall have grown up. And Judah did no more delight in Tamar, to give her unto Shiloh, for he said, Peradventure he will also die like his brothers. And Tamar rose up and went, and remained in her father's house, and Tamar was in her father's house for some time. And at the revolution of the year, Eliath, the wife of Judah, died, and Judah was comforted for his wife. And after the death of Eliath, Judah went up with his friend Hirah to Timnah to shear the sheep. And Tamar heard that Judah had gone up to Timnah to shear the sheep, and that Shiloh was grown up, and Judah did not delight in her. And Tamar rose up, and put off the garments of her widowhood. And she put a veil upon her, and she entirely covered herself. And she went and sat in the public thoroughfare, which is upon the road to Timnah. And Judah passed and saw her, and took her, and he came to her, and she conceived by him. And at the time of being delivered, behold, there were twins in her womb. And he called the name of the first Perez, and the name of the second Zara. In those days Joseph was still confined in the prison house in the land of Egypt. At that time the attendants of Pharaoh were standing before him, the chief of the butlers and the chief of the bakers, which belonged to the king of Egypt. And the butler took wine and placed it before the king to drink, and the baker placed bread before the king to eat. And the king drank of the wine and ate of the bread, he and his servants and ministers that ate at the king's table. And whilst they were eating and drinking, the butler and the baker remained there. And Pharaoh's ministers found many flies in the wine, which the butler had brought, and stones of niter were found in the baker's bread. And the captain of the guard placed Joseph as an attendant on Pharaoh's officers. And Pharaoh's officers were in confinement 1 year. And at the end of the year they both dreamed dreams in one night, in the place of confinement where they were. And in the morning Joseph came to them to attend upon them as usual. And he saw them, and behold, their countenances were dejected and sad. And Joseph asked them, Why are your countenances sad and dejected this day? And they said unto him, We dreamed a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. And Joseph said unto them, Relate, I pray you, your dream unto me, and God shall give you an answer of peace as you desire. And the butler related his dream unto Joseph. And he said, I saw in my dream, and behold, a large vine was before me. And upon that vine I saw 3 branches. And the vine speedily blossomed, and reached a great height, and its clusters were ripened and became grapes. And I took the grapes and pressed them in a cup, and placed it in Pharaoh's hand, and he drank. And Joseph said unto him, The 3 branches that were upon the vine are 3 days. Yet within 3 days the king will order thee to be brought out, and he will restore thee to thy office. And thou shalt give the king his wine to drink as at first, when thou wast his butler. But let me find favor in thy sight, that thou shalt remember me to Pharaoh when it be well with thee, and do kindness unto me, and get me brought forth from this prison. For I was stolen away from the land of Canaan, and was sold for a slave in this place. And also that which was told thee concerning my master's wife is false, for they placed me in this dungeon for naught. And the butler answered Joseph, saying, If the king deal well with me as at first, as thou hast interpreted to me, I will do all that thou desirest, and get thee brought out of this dungeon. And the baker, seeing that Joseph had accurately interpreted the butler's dream, also approached and related the whole of his dream to Joseph. And he said unto him, In my dream I saw, and behold, 3 white baskets upon my head. And I looked, and behold, there were in the uppermost basket all manner of baked meats for my Pharaoh. And behold, the birds were eating them from off my head. And Joseph said unto him, The 3 baskets which thou didst see are 3 days. Yet within 3 days Pharaoh will take off thy head, and hang thee upon a tree, and the birds will eat thy flesh from off thee, as thou sawest in thy dream. In those days the queen was about to be delivered, and upon that day she bare a son unto the king of Egypt. And they proclaimed that the king had gotten his firstborn son, and all the people of Egypt together with the officers and servants of Pharaoh rejoiced greatly. And upon the 3rd day of his birth Pharaoh made a feast for his officers and servants, for the host of the land of Zoar and of the land of Egypt. And all the people of Egypt and the servants of Pharaoh came to eat and drink with the king at the feast of his son, and to rejoice at the king's rejoicing. And all the officers of the king and his servants were rejoicing at that time for 8 days at the feast. And they made merry with all sorts of musical instruments, with timbrels and with dances in the king's house for 8 days. And the butler, to whom Joseph had interpreted his dream, forgot Joseph, and he did not mention him to the king as he had promised. For this thing was from the Lord in order to punish Joseph, because he had trusted in man. And Joseph remained after this in the prison house 2 years, until he had completed 12 years. And Isaac, the son of Abraham, was still living in those days in the land of Canaan. He was very aged, 180 years old. And Esau his son, the brother of Jacob, was in the land of Edom, and he and his sons had possessions in it amongst the children of Seir. And Esau heard that his father's time was drawing nigh to die. And he and his sons and household came unto the land of Canaan, unto his father's house. And Jacob and his sons went forth from the place where they dwelt in Hebron. And they all came to their father Isaac. And they found Esau and his sons in the tent. And Jacob and his sons sat before his father Isaac. And Jacob was still mourning for his son Joseph. And Isaac said unto Jacob, Bring me hither thy sons, and I will bless them. And Jacob brought his 11 children before his father Isaac. And Isaac placed his hands upon all the sons of Jacob, and he took hold of them and embraced them, and kissed them one by one. And Isaac blessed them on that day, and he said unto them, May the God of your fathers bless you and increase your seed like the stars of heaven for number. And Isaac also blessed the sons of Esau, saying, May God cause you to be a dread and a terror to all that will behold you, and to all your enemies. And Isaac called Jacob and his sons, and they all came and sat before Isaac. And Isaac said unto Jacob, The Lord God of the whole earth said unto me, Unto thy seed will I give this land for an inheritance, if thy children keep my statutes and my ways. And I will perform unto them the oath which I swore unto thy father Abraham. Now therefore, my son, teach thy children and thy children's children to fear the Lord, and to go in the good way which will please the Lord thy God. For if you keep the ways of the Lord and his statutes, the Lord will also keep unto you his covenant with Abraham. and will do well with you and your seed all the days. And when Isaac had finished commanding Jacob and his children, he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. And Jacob and Esau fell upon the face of their father Isaac, and they wept. And Isaac was 180 years old when he died in the land of Canaan, in Hebron. And his sons carried him to the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham had bought from the children of Heth for a possession of a burial place. And all the kings of the land of Canaan went with Jacob and Esau to bury Isaac. And all the kings of Canaan showed Isaac great honor at his death. And the sons of Jacob and the sons of Esau went barefooted round about, walking and lamenting, until they reached Kirith Arba. And Jacob and Esau buried their father Isaac in the cave of Machpelah, which is in Kirith Arba in Hebron. And they buried him with very great honor, as at the funeral of kings. And Jacob and his sons, and Esau and his sons, and all the kings of Canaan made a great and heavy mourning. And they buried him and mourned him for many days. And at the death of Isaac he left his cattle and his possessions, and all belonging to him, to his sons. And Esau said unto Jacob, Behold, I pray thee, all that our father has left, we will divide it in 2 parts, and I will have the choice. And Jacob said, We will do so. And Jacob took all that Isaac had left in the land of Canaan, the cattle and the property, and he placed them in 2 parts before Esau and his sons. And he said unto Esau, Behold, all this is before thee. Choose thou unto thyself the half which thou wilt take. And Jacob said unto Esau, Hear thou, I pray thee, what I will speak unto thee, saying, The Lord God of heaven and earth spoke unto our fathers Abraham and Isaac, saying, Unto thy seed will I give this land for an inheritance forever. Now therefore, all that our father has left is before thee. And behold, all the land is before thee. Choose thou from them what thou desirest. If thou desirest the whole land, take it for thee and thy children forever, and I will take this riches. And if thou desirest the riches, take it unto thee, and I will take this land for me and for my children to inherit it forever. And Nebaioth, the son of Ishmael, was then in the land with his children. And Esau went on that day and consulted with him, saying, Thus has Jacob spoken unto me, and thus has he answered me. Now give thy advice, and we will hear. And Nebaioth said, What is this that Jacob hath spoken unto thee? Behold, all the children of Canaan are dwelling securely in their land, and Jacob saith he will inherit it with his seed all the days. Go now therefore, and take all thy father's riches, and leave Jacob thy brother in the land, as he has spoken. And Esau rose up and returned to Jacob, and did all that Nebaioth the son of Ishmael had advised. And Esau took all the riches that Isaac had left, the souls, the beasts, the cattle, and the property, and all the riches. He gave nothing to his brother Jacob. And Jacob took all the land of Canaan, from the brook of Egypt unto the river Euphrates. And he took it for an everlasting possession, and for his children, and for his seed after him forever. Jacob also took from his brother Esau the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron, which Abraham had bought from Ephron for a possession of a burial place for him and his seed forever. And Jacob wrote all these things in the book of purchase, and he signed it, and he testified all this with 4 faithful witnesses. And these are the words which Jacob wrote in the book, saying, The land of Canaan, and all the cities of the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, all the 7 nations from the river of Egypt unto the river Euphrates, and the city of Hebron, Kirith Arba, and the cave which is in it. The whole did Jacob buy from his brother Esau for value, for a possession, and for an inheritance for his seed after him forever. And Jacob took the book of purchase and the signature, the command and the statutes and the revealed book, and he placed them in an earthen vessel in order that they should remain for a long time. And he delivered them into the hands of his children. Esau took all that his father had left him after his death from his brother Jacob, and he took all the property, from man and beast, camel and ass, ox and lamb, silver and gold, stones and bdellium, and all the riches which had belonged to Isaac the son of Abraham. There was nothing left which Esau did not take unto himself, from all that Isaac had left after his death. And Esau took all this, and he and his children went home to the land of Seir the Horite, away from his brother Jacob and his children. And Esau had possessions amongst the children of Seir, and Esau returned not to the land of Canaan from that day forward. And the whole land of Canaan became an inheritance to the children of Israel for an everlasting inheritance. And Esau with all his children inherited the mountain of Seir. The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 48. In those days, after the death of Isaac, the Lord commanded and caused a famine upon the whole earth. At that time, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, was sitting upon his throne in the land of Egypt, and lay in his bed and dreamed dreams. And Pharaoh saw in his dream that he was standing by the side of the river of Egypt. And whilst he was standing, he saw, and behold, 7 fat, fleshed, and well-favored kine came up out of the river, and 7 other kine, lean-fleshed and ill-favored, came up after them, and the 7 ill-favored ones swallowed up the well-favored ones, and still their appearance was ill as at first. And he awoke, and he slept again, and he dreamed a second time. And he saw, and behold, 7 ears of corn came upon one stalk, rank and good, and 7 thin ears blasted with the east wind sprang up after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the full ones. And Pharaoh awoke out of his dream. And in the morning the king remembered his dreams, and his spirit was sadly troubled on account of his dreams. And the king hastened and sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and the wise men, and they came and stood before Pharaoh. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed dreams, and there is none to interpret them. And they said unto the king, Relate thy dreams to thy servants, and let us hear them. And the king related his dreams to them. And they all answered and said with one voice to the king, May the king live forever, and this is the interpretation of thy dreams. The 7 good kine which thou didst see denote 7 daughters that will be born unto thee in the latter days. And the 7 kine which thou sawest come up after them and swallowed them up are for a sign that the daughters which will be born unto thee will all die in the lifetime of the king. And that which thou didst see in the second dream of 7 full good ears of corn coming up upon one stalk, this is their interpretation, that thou wilt build unto thyself in the latter days 7 cities throughout the land of Egypt. And that which thou sawest of the 7 blasted ears of corn springing up after them and swallowing them up, whilst thou didst behold them with thine eyes, is for a sign that the cities which thou wilt build will all be destroyed in the latter days, in the lifetime of the king. And when they spoke these words, the king did not incline his ear to their words, neither did he fix his heart upon them. For the king knew in his wisdom that they did not give a proper interpretation of the dreams. And when they had finished speaking before the king answered them, saying, What is this thing that you have spoken unto me? Surely you have uttered falsehood and spoken lies. Therefore now give the proper interpretation of my dreams, that you may not die. And the king commanded after this, and he sent and called again for other wise men. And they came and stood before the king, and the king related his dreams to them. And they all answered him according to the first interpretation. And the king's anger was kindled, and he was very wroth. And the king said unto them, Surely you speak lies and utter falsehood in what you have said. And the king commanded that a proclamation should be issued throughout the land of Egypt, saying, It is resolved by the king and his great men, that any wise man who knoweth and understandeth the interpretation of dreams, and will not come this day before the king, shall die. And the man that will declare unto the king the proper interpretation of his dreams, there shall be given unto him all that he will require from the king. And all the wise men of the land of Egypt came before the king, together with all the magicians and sorcerers that were in Egypt, and in Goshen, in Ramses, in Tachpanches, in Zoar, and in all the places on the borders of Egypt. And they all stood before the king. And all the nobles and the princes and the attendants belonging to the king came together from all the cities of Egypt. And they all sat before the king. And the king related his dreams before the wise men and the princes. And all that sat before the king were astonished at the vision. And all the wise men who were before the king were greatly divided in their interpretation of his dreams. Some of them interpreted to the king, saying, "The 7 good kine are 7 kings, who from the king's issue will be raised over Egypt. And the 7 bad kine are 7 princes, who will stand up against them in the latter days and destroy them. And the 7 ears of corn are the 7 great princes belonging to Egypt, who will fall in the hands of the 7 less powerful princes of their enemies in the wars of our Lord the King." And some of them interpreted to the king in this manner, saying, "The 7 good kine are the strong cities of Egypt, and the 7 bad kine are the 7 nations of the land of Canaan, who will come against the 7 cities of Egypt in the latter days and destroy them. And that which thou sawest in the second dream of 7 good and bad ears of corn is a sign that the government of Egypt will again return to thy seed as at first. And in his reign the people of the cities of Egypt will turn against the 7 cities of Canaan, who are stronger than they are, and will destroy them, and the government of Egypt will return to thy seed." And some of them said unto the king, "This is the interpretation of thy dreams. The 7 good kine are 7 queens, whom thou wilt take for wives in the latter days. And the 7 bad kine denote that these women will all die in the lifetime of the king. And the 7 good and bad ears of corn, which thou didst see in the second dream, are 14 children. And it will be in the latter days that they will stand up and fight amongst themselves, and 7 of them will smite the 7 that are more powerful." And some of them said these words unto the king, saying, "The 7 good kine denote that 7 children will be born to thee, and they will slay 7 of thy children's children in the latter days. And the 7 good ears of corn which thou didst see in the second dream are those princes against whom 7 other less powerful princes will fight and destroy them in the latter days, and avenge thy children's cause, and the government will again return to thy seed." And the king heard all the words of the wise men of Egypt, and their interpretation of his dreams, and none of them pleased the king. And the king knew in his wisdom that they did not altogether speak correctly in all these words. For this was from the Lord to frustrate the words of the wise men of Egypt, in order that Joseph might go forth from the house of confinement, and in order that he should become great in Egypt. And the king saw that none amongst all the wise men and magicians of Egypt spoke correctly to him. And the king's wrath was kindled, and his anger burned within him. And the king commanded that all the wise men and magicians should go out from before him. And they all went out from before the king with shame and disgrace. And the king commanded that a proclamation be sent throughout Egypt to slay all the magicians that were in Egypt, and not one of them should be suffered to live. And the captains of the guards belonging to the king rose up, and each man drew his sword, and they began to smite the magicians of Egypt and the wise men. And after this, Merod, chief butler to the king, came and bowed down before the king and sat before him. And the butler said unto the king, "May the king live forever, and his government be exalted in the land." Thou wast angry with thy servant in those days, now 2 years past, and didst place me in the ward, and I was for some time in the ward, I and the chief of the bakers. And there was with us a Hebrew servant, belonging to the captain of the guard. His name was Joseph, for his master had been angry with him and placed him in the house of confinement, and he attended us there. And in some time after, when we were in the ward, we dreamed dreams in one night, I and the chief of the bakers. We dreamed, each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And we came in the morning and told them to that servant, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream did he correctly interpret. And it came to pass as he interpreted to us. So was the event. There fell not to the ground any of his words. And now therefore, my lord and king, do not slay the people of Egypt for naught. Behold, that slave is still confined in the house, by the captain of the guard, his master, in the house of confinement. If it pleaseth the king, let him send for him, that he may come before thee, and he will make known to thee the correct interpretation of the dream which thou didst dream. And the king heard the words of the chief butler, and the king ordered that the wise men of Egypt should not be slain. And the king ordered his servants to bring Joseph before him. And the king said unto them, Go to him, and do not terrify him, lest he be confused, and will not know to speak properly. And the servants of the king went to Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And the king's servants shaved him, and he changed his prison garment, and he came before the king. And the king was sitting upon his royal throne, in a princely dress, girt around with a golden ephod, and the fine gold which was upon it sparkled, and the carbuncle, and the ruby, and the emerald, together with all the precious stones that were upon the king's head, dazzled the eye. And Joseph wondered greatly at the king. And the throne upon which the king sat was covered with gold and silver, and with onyx stones, and it had 70 steps. And it was their custom throughout the land of Egypt that every man who came to speak to the king, if he was a prince, or one that was estimable in the sight of the king, he ascended to the king's throne as far as the 31st step, and the king would descend to the 36th step and speak with him. If he was one of the common people, he ascended to the 3rd step, and the king would descend to the 4th and speak to him. And their custom was, moreover, that any man who understood to speak in all the 70 languages, he ascended the 70 steps, and went up and spoke till he reached the king. And any man who could not complete the 70, he ascended as many steps as the languages which he knew to speak in. And it was customary in those days in Egypt that no one should reign over them, but who understood to speak in the 70 languages. And when Joseph came before the king, he bowed down to the ground before the king, and he ascended to the 3rd step. And the king sat upon the 4th step, and spoke with Joseph. And the king said unto Joseph, I dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter to interpret it properly. And I commanded this day that all the magicians of Egypt and the wise men thereof should come before me. And I related my dreams to them, and no one has properly interpreted them to me. And after this, I this day heard concerning thee, that thou art a wise man, and canst correctly interpret every dream that thou hearest. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, Let Pharaoh relate his dreams that he dreamed. Surely the interpretations belong to God. And Pharaoh related his dreams to Joseph, the dream of the kine and the dream of the ears of corn. And the king left off speaking. And Joseph was then clothed with the Spirit of God before the king, and he knew all the things that would befall the king from that day forward. And he knew the proper interpretation of the king's dream, and he spoke before the king. And Joseph found favor in the sight of the king, and the king inclined his ears and his heart, and he heard all the words of Joseph. And Joseph said unto the king, Do not imagine that they are two dreams, for it is only one dream. For that which God has chosen to do throughout the land, he has shown to the king in his dream. And this is the proper interpretation of thy dream. The 7 good kine and ears of corn are 7 years, and the 7 bad kine and ears of corn are also 7 years. It is one dream. Behold, the 7 years that are coming, there will be a great plenty throughout the land. And after that, the 7 years of famine will follow them, a very grievous famine. And all the plenty will be forgotten from the land, and the famine will consume the inhabitants of the land. The king dreamed one dream, and the dream was therefore repeated unto Pharaoh, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore I will give thee counsel, and deliver thy soul and the souls of the inhabitants of the land from the evil of the famine, that thou seek throughout thy kingdom for a man very discreet and wise, who knoweth all the affairs of government, and appoint him to superintend over the land of Egypt. And let the man whom thou placest over Egypt appoint officers under him, that they gather in all the food of the good years that are coming, and let them lay up corn and deposit it in thy appointed stores. And let them keep that food for the 7 years of famine, that it may be found for thee and thy people and thy whole land, and that thou and thy land be not cut off by the famine. Let all the inhabitants of the land be also ordered that they gather in every man the produce of his field, all sorts of food, during the 7 good years, and that they place it in their stores, that it may be found for them in the days of the famine, and that they may live upon it. This is the proper interpretation of thy dream, and this is the counsel given to save thy soul and the souls of all thy subjects. And the king answered and said unto Joseph, Who saith and who knoweth that thy words are correct? And he said unto the king, This shall be a sign for thee respecting all my words, that they are true, and that my advice is good for thee. Behold, thy wife sitteth this day upon the stool of delivery, and she will bear thee a son, and thou wilt rejoice with him, when thy child shall have gone forth from his mother's womb. Thy firstborn son, that has been born these 2 years back, shall die, and thou wilt be comforted in the child that will be born unto thee this day. And Joseph finished speaking these words to the king, and he bowed down to the king, and he went out. And when Joseph had gone out from the king's presence, those signs which Joseph had spoken unto the king came to pass on that day. And the queen bare a son on that day, and the king heard the glad tidings about his son, and he rejoiced. And when the reporter had gone forth from the king's presence, the king's servants found the firstborn son of the king fallen dead upon the ground. And there was great lamentation and noise in the king's house. And the king heard it, and he said, What is the noise and lamentation that I have heard in the house? And they told the king that his firstborn son had died. Then the king knew that all Joseph's words that he had spoken were correct, and the king was consoled for his son by the child that was born to him on that day, as Joseph had spoken. The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 49. After these things the king sent and assembled all his officers and servants, and all the princes and nobles belonging to the king, and they all came before the king. And the king said unto them, Behold, you have seen and heard all the words of this Hebrew man, and all the signs which he declared would come to pass, and not any of his words have fallen to the ground. You know that he has given a proper interpretation of the dream, and it will surely come to pass. Now therefore take counsel, and know what you will do, and how the land will be delivered from the famine. Seek now, and see whether the like can be found, in whose heart there is wisdom and knowledge, and I will appoint him over the land. For you have heard what the Hebrew man has advised concerning this, to save the land therewith from the famine. And I know that the land will not be delivered from the famine, but with the advice of the Hebrew man, him that advised me. And they all answered the king and said, The counsel which the Hebrew has given concerning this is good. Now therefore, our Lord and King, behold, the whole land is in thy hand. Do that which seemeth good in thy sight. Him who thou choosest, and whom thou in thy wisdom knowest to be wise and capable of delivering the land with his wisdom, him shall the king appoint to be under him over the land. And the king said to all the officers, I have thought that since God has made known to the Hebrew man all that he has spoken, there is none so discreet and wise in the whole land as he is. If it seem good in your sight, I will place him over the land, for he will save the land with his wisdom. And all the officers answered the king and said, But surely it is written in the laws of Egypt, and it should not be violated, that no man shall reign over Egypt, nor be the second to the king, but one who has knowledge in all the languages of the sons of men. Now therefore, our Lord and King, behold, this Hebrew man can only speak the Hebrew language. And how then can he be over us, the second under government, a man who not even knoweth our language? Now, we pray thee, send for him, and let him come before thee, and prove him in all things, and do as thou see fit. And the king said, It shall be done tomorrow, and the thing that you have spoken is good. And all the officers came on that day before the king. And on that night the Lord sent one of his ministering angels, and he came into the land of Egypt unto Joseph. And the angel of the Lord stood over Joseph, and behold, Joseph was lying in the bed at night in his master's house in the dungeon, for his master had put him back into the dungeon on account of his wife. And the angel roused him from his sleep, and Joseph rose up and stood upon his legs. And behold, the angel of the Lord was standing opposite to him. And the angel of the Lord spoke with Joseph, and he taught him all the languages of man in that night, and he called his name Jehoshaphat. And the angel of the Lord went from him, and Joseph returned and lay upon his bed. And Joseph was astonished at the vision which he saw. And it came to pass in the morning that the king sent for all his officers and servants, and they all came and sat before the king. And the king ordered Joseph to be brought, and the king's servants went and brought Joseph before Pharaoh. And the king came forth and ascended the steps of the throne. And Joseph spoke unto the king in all languages. And Joseph went up to him and spoke unto the king until he arrived before the king in the 70th step. And he sat before the king. And the king greatly rejoiced on account of Joseph, and all the king's officers rejoiced greatly with the king when they heard all the words of Joseph. And the thing seemed good in the sight of the king and the officers, to appoint Joseph to be second to the king over the whole land of Egypt. And the king spoke to Joseph, saying, Now thou didst give me counsel to appoint a wise man over the land of Egypt, in order with his wisdom to save the land from the famine. Now therefore, since God has made all this known to thee, and all the words which thou hast spoken, there is not throughout the land a discreet and wise man like unto thee. And thy name no more shall be called Joseph, but Zaphnath-Paaneah shall be thy name. Thou shalt be second to me, and according to thy word shall be all the affairs of my government, and at thy word shall my people go out and come in. Also from under thy hand shall my servants and officers receive their salary, which is given to them monthly. And to thee shall all the people of the land bow down. Only in my throne will I be greater than thou. And the king took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon the hand of Joseph. And the king dressed Joseph in a princely garment, and he put a golden crown upon his head, and he put a golden chain upon his neck. And the king commanded his servants, and they made him ride in the second chariot belonging to the king, that went opposite to the king's chariot. And he caused him to ride upon a great and strong horse from the king's horses, and to be conducted through the streets of the land of Egypt. And the king commanded that all those that played upon timbrels, harps, and other musical instruments should go forth with Joseph. 1,000 timbrels, 1,000 mekoloth, and 1,000 nebalim went after him, and 5,000 men with drawn swords glittering in their hands. And they went marching and playing before Joseph. And 20,000 of the great men of the king, girt with girdles of skin covered with gold, marched at the right hand of Joseph, and 20,000 at his left. And all the women and damsels went upon the roofs, or stood in the streets, playing and rejoicing at Joseph, and gazed at the appearance of Joseph and at his beauty. And the king's people went before him and behind him, perfuming the road with frankincense and with cassia, and with all sorts of fine perfume, and scattered myrrh and aloes along the road. And 20 men proclaimed these words before him throughout the land in a loud voice. Do you see this man whom the king has chosen to be his second? All the affairs of government shall be regulated by him, and he that transgresses his orders, or that does not bow down before him to the ground, shall die. For he rebels against the king and his second. And when the heralds had ceased proclaiming, all the people of Egypt bowed down to the ground before Joseph and said, May the king live, also may his second live. And all the inhabitants of Egypt bowed down along the road. And when the heralds approached them, they bowed down, and they rejoiced with all sorts of timbrels, mekol, and nebal before Joseph. And Joseph upon his horse lifted up his eyes to heaven, and called out and said, He raiseth the poor man from the dust. He lifteth up the needy from the dunghill. O Lord of hosts, happy is the man who trusteth in thee. And Joseph passed throughout the land of Egypt with Pharaoh's servants and officers, and they showed him the whole land of Egypt and all the king's treasures. And Joseph returned and came on that day before Pharaoh, and the king gave unto Joseph a possession in the land of Egypt, a possession of fields and vineyards. And the king gave unto Joseph 3,000 talents of silver, and 1,000 talents of gold, and onyx stones, and bdellium, and many gifts. And on the next day the king commanded all the people of Egypt to bring unto Joseph offerings and gifts, and that he that violated the command of the king should die. And they made a high place in the street of the city, and they spread out garments there, and whoever brought anything to Joseph put it into the high place. And all the people of Egypt cast something into the high place, one man a golden earring, and other rings and earrings, and different vessels of gold and silver work, and onyx stones, and bdellium, did he cast upon the high place. Every one gave something of what he possessed. And Joseph took all these and placed them in his treasuries. And all the officers and nobles belonging to the king exalted Joseph, and they gave him many gifts, seeing that the king had chosen him to be his second. And the king sent to Potiphera, the son of Ahiram, priest of On, and he took his young daughter Osnath, and gave her unto Joseph for a wife. And the damsel was very comely, a virgin, one whom man had not known. And Joseph took her for a wife. And the king said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and beside thee none shall dare to lift up his hand or his foot to regulate my people throughout the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, and Joseph went out from before the king, and he became the king's second in Egypt. And the king gave Joseph 100 servants to attend him in his house. And Joseph also sent and purchased many servants, and they remained in the house of Joseph. Joseph then built for himself a very magnificent house, like unto the houses of kings, before the court of the king's palace. And he made in the house a large temple, very elegant in appearance, and convenient for his residence. 3 years was Joseph in erecting his house. And Joseph made unto himself a very elegant throne, of abundance of gold and silver. And he covered it with onyx stones and bdellium. And he made upon it the likeness of the whole land of Egypt, and the likeness of the river of Egypt that watereth the whole land of Egypt. And Joseph sat securely upon his throne in his house, and the Lord increased Joseph's wisdom. And all the inhabitants of Egypt and Pharaoh's servants and his princes loved Joseph exceedingly, for this thing was from the Lord to Joseph. And Joseph had an army that made war, going out in hosts and troops to the number of 40,600 men, capable of bearing arms to assist the king and Joseph against the enemy, besides the king's officers and his servants and inhabitants of Egypt without number. And Joseph gave unto his mighty men and to all his host shields and javelins and caps and coats of mail and stones for slinging. The Book of Jasher, a captioned audiobook narrated by In His Word 2. Chapter 50. At that time the children of Tarshish came against the sons of Ishmael, and made war with them. And the children of Tarshish spoiled the Ishmaelites for a long time. And the children of Ishmael were small in number in those days, and they could not prevail over the children of Tarshish, and they were sorely oppressed. And the old men of the Ishmaelites sent a record to the king of Egypt, saying, Send, I pray thee, unto thy servants officers and hosts to help us fight against the children of Tarshish, for we have been consuming away for a long time. And Pharaoh sent Joseph with his mighty men and host which were with him, and also his mighty men from the king's house. And they went to the land of Havilah, to the children of Ishmael, to assist them against the children of Tarshish. And the children of Ishmael fought with the children of Tarshish. And Joseph smote the Tarshishites, and he subdued all their land. And the children of Ishmael dwell therein unto this day. And when the land of Tarshish was subdued, all the Tarshishites ran away, and came on the border of their brethren, the children of Javan. And Joseph with all his mighty men and host returned to Egypt, not one man of them missing. And at the revolution of the year, in the 2nd year of Joseph's reigning over Egypt, the Lord gave great plenty throughout the land for 7 years, as Joseph had spoken. For the Lord blessed all the produce of the earth in those days for 7 years. And they ate and were greatly satisfied. And Joseph at that time had officers under him, and they collected all the food of the good years, and heaped corn year by year, and they placed it in the treasuries of Joseph. And at any time when they gathered the food, Joseph commanded that they should bring the corn in the ears, and also bring it with some of the soil of the field, that it should not spoil. And Joseph did according to this year by year, and he heaped up corn like the sand of the sea for abundance. For his stores were immense, and could not be numbered for abundance. And also all the inhabitants of Egypt gathered all sorts of food in their stores, in great abundance, during the 7 good years. But they did not do unto it as Joseph did. And all the food which Joseph and the Egyptians had gathered during the 7 years of plenty was secured for the land in stores for the 7 years of famine, for the support of the whole land. And the inhabitants of Egypt filled each man his store and his concealed place with corn, to be for support during the famine. And Joseph placed all the food that he had gathered in all the cities of Egypt, and he closed all the stores and placed sentinels over them. And Joseph's wife, Osnath, the daughter of Potiphera, bare him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Joseph was 34 years old when he begat them. And the lads grew up, and they went in his ways, and in his instructions. They did not deviate from the way which their father taught them, either to the right or left. And the Lord was with the lads, and they grew up and had understanding, and skill in all wisdom, and in all the affairs of government. And all the king's officers and his great men of the inhabitants of Egypt exalted the lads, and they were brought up amongst the king's children. And the 7 years of plenty that were throughout the land were at an end, and the 7 years of famine came after them, as Joseph had spoken, and the famine was throughout the land. And all the people of Egypt saw that the famine had commenced in the land of Egypt. And all the people of Egypt opened their stores of corn, for the famine prevailed over them. And they found all the food that was in their stores full of vermin, and not fit to eat. And the famine prevailed throughout the land, And all the inhabitants of Egypt came and cried before Pharaoh, for the famine was heavy upon them. And they said unto Pharaoh, Give food unto thy servants, and wherefore shall we die through hunger before thy eyes, even we and our little ones? And Pharaoh answered them, saying, And wherefore do you cry unto me? Did not Joseph command that the corn should be laid up during the 7 years of plenty, for the years of famine? And wherefore did you not hearken to his voice? And the people of Egypt answered the king, saying, As thy soul liveth, our lord, thy servants have done all that Joseph ordered. For thy servants also gathered in all the produce of their fields during the 7 years of plenty, and laid it in the stores unto this day. And when the famine prevailed over thy servants, we opened our stores, and behold, all our produce was filled with vermin, and was not fit for food. And when the king heard all that had befallen the inhabitants of Egypt, the king was greatly afraid on account of the famine, and he was much terrified. And the king answered the people of Egypt, saying, Since all this has happened unto you, go unto Joseph, do whatever he shall say unto you, transgress not his commands. And all the people of Egypt went forth and came unto Joseph, and said unto him, Give unto us food, and wherefore shall we die before thee through hunger? For we gathered in our produce during the 7 years, as thou didst command, and we put it in store, and thus has it befallen us. When Joseph heard all the words of the people of Egypt, and what had befallen them, Joseph opened all his stores of produce, and he sold it unto the people of Egypt. And the famine prevailed throughout the land, and the famine was in all countries. But in the land of Egypt there was produce for sale. And all the inhabitants of Egypt came unto Joseph to buy corn, for the famine prevailed over them, and all their corn was spoiled, and Joseph daily sold it to all the people of Egypt. And all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, and the Philistines, and those beyond the Jordan, and the children of the east, and all the cities of the lands far and nigh, heard that there was corn in Egypt. And they all came to Egypt to buy corn, for the famine prevailed over them. And Joseph opened the stores of corn, and placed officers over them, and they daily stood and sold to all that came. And Joseph knew that his brethren would also come to Egypt to buy corn, for the famine prevailed throughout the earth. And Joseph commanded all his people that they should cause it to be proclaimed throughout the land of Egypt, saying, It is the pleasure of the king, of his second, and of their great men, that any person who wishes to buy corn in Egypt shall not send his servants to Egypt to purchase, but his sons, and also any Egyptian or Canaanite who shall come from any of the stores from buying corn in Egypt, and shall go and sell it throughout the land, he shall die, for no one shall buy but for the support of his household. And any man leading 2 or 3 beasts shall die, for a man shall only lead his own beast. And Joseph placed sentinels at the gates of Egypt, and commanded them, saying, Any person who may come to buy corn, suffer him not to enter until his name, and the name of his father, and the name of his father's father be written down. And whatever is written any day, send their names unto me in the evening, that I may know their names. And Joseph placed officers throughout the land of Egypt, and he commanded them to do all these things. And Joseph did all these things, and made these statutes, in order that he might know when his brethren should come to Egypt to buy corn. And Joseph's people caused it daily to be proclaimed in Egypt according to these words and statutes which Joseph had commanded. And all the inhabitants of the east and west country and of all the earth heard of the statutes and regulations which Joseph had enacted in Egypt. And the inhabitants of the extreme parts of the earth came, and they bought corn in Egypt day after day, and then went away. And all of the officers of Egypt did as Joseph had commanded. And all that came to Egypt to buy corn, the gatekeepers would write their names and their fathers' names, and daily bring them in the evening before Joseph.